While I was researching information on the jinn, I discovered a lot of the mythology around Mount Qaf. And Mount Qaf in Arabic tradition is a mysterious mountain, renowned as the farthest point of the earth, owing to its location on the far side of the ocean encircling the earth. Because of its remoteness, the North Pole has been identified as the location of this mountain. It is also called the only place in the world where the rock will land. Now, Mount Qaf is also unique in the sense as it's believed to be the home of the jinn, or tribes of jinn. And there's quite a rich description used to describe the world of the jinn that lies on Mount Qaf and beyond, including great emerald mountains and cities where is a perpetual twilight. It describes essentially a folkloric cosmology, and it's this cosmology that led me to explore this particular concept in a little bit deeper. This idea of the access of the world, or the sacred mountain, and that led me to the idea of Rupes Nigra, or the myth of it rather. So Rupes Nigra, which means black rock, is a phantom island, and it's believed to be this giant black mountain located at the magnetic North Pole, or it is the North Pole itself. So the rationale was all compasses pointed to this area, so it must be a magnetic island. So it's a similar myth to the Persian and Arab myth of Mount Qaf. But one interesting thing about it is there's a particular book associated with Rupes Negra which identified the island itself, the island mountain rather, and it led to this mountain being in maps up to the 17th century. So the idea came from a lost book called Inventio Fortunata, and the island featured on maps from the 16th to 17th centuries, including those of Geraldus Mercator and his successors. And Mercator described the island in 1577 in a letter to Dr. John Dee. In the midst of the four countries is a whirlpool, into which there empty these four indrawing seas which divide the north, and the water rushes about and descends into the earth, just as if one were pouring it through a filter funnel. It is 4 degrees wide on every side of the pole, that is to say 8 degrees altogether, except that right under the pole is where there lies bare a rock in the midst of the sea. Its circumference is almost 33 French miles, and it is all of magnetic stone. This is word for word everything that I have copied out of this author, and the author he's referring to is Jacobus Knoiden. It's quite interesting there that he's writing to John Dee, and anybody who's studied magic or the occult in any degree should be aware of who John Dee is. So this particular myth takes an interesting turn. Here we see Mercator's map of the Arctic, and what it shows here is Rupes Negra and the 4 islands around it. So it's referred to as the Pole Arcticus, which is clearly the North Pole, this island. So nothing is known of this particular island. There's nothing clear about it, yet it appeared in all these maps. So the lost book itself, Inventio Fortunata, it's assumed to be dating from the 14th century, and it contains this description of the North Pole as the magnetic island. So no direct extracts from the document have ever been discovered, but its influence on the Western idea of geography and the Arctic region persisted for several centuries. The book is said to be a travelogue written by a 14th century Franciscan friar from Oxford who travelled the North Atlantic region in the early 1360s, making some half a dozen journeys conducting business on behalf of the King of England, and that at the time was Edward III. He described what he's found on his first journey to the islands beyond the 54 degrees north in a book, Inventio Fortunata, which he then presented to the king. Unfortunately, by the time Arctic explorers were seeking information in the 1490s, the Inventio had gone missing, and was only known through a summary in a second text, Itinerarium, written by a traveller named Jacob Knoyden, and Knoyden's summary was the basis for the depiction of the Arctic region on many maps, the earliest being Martin Boheim's 1492 globe, and by the late 16th century even Knoyden's text was missing, so most of what we know about the contents of Inventio Fortunata, other than its use on maps, is found later in a letter from the Flemish cartographer Mercator to John Dee, which we mentioned. And that letter is now located in the British Museum. So Knoyden's information came in a very roundabout way. A priest from one of the Atlantic islands had returned to Norway and bringing with him an astrolabe which he received from a visiting Franciscan friar in exchange for a religious book. He made a detailed report to the King of Norway. Copies still survive of a social and geographical description of Greenland by a local church official named Ivar Bardason, who turns up in Norwegian records in 1364. So much of Knoyden's story tallies well with reality, although this report does not contain the sort of personal information relayed by Knoyden. Knoyden seems to have obtained his information from Norwegian sources sometime later. Neither he nor the priest haven't actually seen the Inventio. Knoyden's account, originally in his own language, translations that I'm about to read are based on Eva Taylor's version. Knoyden's account mixes probable fact with what may have been his own attempts to research the background, stating that Greenland was first settled at the orders of King Arthur, whose army supposedly conquered the North Atlantic islands. He also referred to the indrawing seas currents which drew ships northward, so that, and this is the quotation, nearly 4,000 persons entered the indrawing seas who never returned. But in AD 1364, 8 of these people came to the king's court in Norway. Among them were 2 priests, one of them whom had an astrolabe, was descended in the 5th generation from a Brussels citizen. One, I say, all 8 were from those who had penetrated the northern regions in the first ships. And that's quite interesting. The Indrawn Sea and some of the references here seem to kind of help support some of the ideas around that area having an entrance into the inner earth. A particular theory which I do deeply enjoy reading about. So as I said, the influence on maps was massive. Where this led me to as well was thinking about, well, the idea of the sacred map in cosmology and the sacred region in cosmology, because essentially Mount Quaff is seen as the borders of the world and a mountain range that supports the sky. And Rupes Negra has this idea of it being some sort of entrance or exit from this world. There's something of mystery and magic about it, where the laws of nature seem to change, the inbound sea, the magnetic draw to the place. And off the back of that, I did a bit more research, and I came across a guy called Chet van Druzer, and he has written extensively about maps and their place in history, and it's some really, really interesting work. If you have a chance to have a look at some of his work on Amazon, it's really interesting books about cartography and the idea of like sea monsters on medieval and Renaissance maps. And I'm going to read some extracts of his work, the Mythic Geography of the Northern Polar Regions, Inventio Fortunata, and Buddhist Cosmology. Sacred centers are usually located near the people in whose mythology they play a part. But there are distant spots on the earth that many different peoples recognize have a special central status, the North and South Poles. These spots are pierced by the axis of the heavens. They are the crowns of the world, about which all the stars dance, the points to which all compasses direct their needles. The recognition of the centrality of the Earth's poles is reflected in one of the names of the sacred centers, Axis Mundi, as well as in various attempts to connect sacred centers with the poles. The city of Beijing is known as the pivot of the 4 quarters, and the sacred center of the city, the Forbidden City, is more precisely known as the Purple Forbidden City, purple being the symbolic color of the North Star, and the designation Purple Forbidden City thus signifying that the Emperor's residence is at the center of the world. There was also a 9th century Islamic tradition argued by Al-Kisa or Kufa that the Kaaba in Mecca, for which the center of the earth is a common epithet among Muslims, is located directly beneath the North Star. Thus, symbolism of or connection with the pole is often ascribed to local sacred centers, while the pole itself, until this century, both in belief and in fact unattainable, has received little mythological attention as a center. I will examine two systems of mythology relating to the northern polar regions, systems which, from very different cultures, turn out to be remarkably similar. Geraldus Mercator is perhaps the only figure in history of cartography whose name has become a household word, and his system of map projection, called the Mercator projection, is still widely used today, albeit usually in slightly modified forms. Mercator was famous for his meticulous research and accuracy, and thus it is quite surprised to see for the first time Mercator's map of the northern polar regions. I'm not going to be able to pronounce the map as its title is in Latin, but it was published in 1595. And on this map, you'll see the North Pole is very unfamiliar to modern eyes, as we mentioned this before. At the center of the map, right at the pole, stands a huge black mountain. This mountain is made of lodestone, the magnetic stone, and is the source of the Earth's magnetic field. The central mountain is surrounded by open water, and then further out by four large islands that form a ring around the pole. The largest of these islands, perhaps 700 by 1,100 miles, and they all have high mountains along their southern rims. These islands are separated by four large inward flowing seas, which are aligned as if to the 4 points of the compass. Though, of course, there is no north, east, or west of the North Pole, every direction from its center is south. Mercator notes inform us that the waters of these oceans carried northward to the pole, and through these rivers with great force, such as no wind could make a ship sail against the current. The waters then disappear into an enormous whirlpool beneath the mountain at the pole and are absorbed into the bowels of the earth. Mercator also tells us that a 4-foot tall Pygmies inhabit the island closest to Europe. More remarkable than the map itself is the fact that many other contemporary maps by the most respected cartographers of the time, show a very similar configuration around the North Pole. Martin Behaim, who died before Mercator was born, made a famous globe in 1492. This is in fact the oldest surviving terrestrial globe. That shows land surrounding the North Pole. There are two large islands right near the pole and in the Western Hemisphere, while extensions of Europe and Asia reach northwards so as to form, together with the two islands just mentioned, a broken circle of land around the pole. A world map by Johannes Reich, the Universa Cognitis Orbis Tabula, published in an edition of Ptolemy's Geographia in Rome 1508, shows four islands around the North Pole. Two, the one north of Greenland and opposite across the pole, are labelled Insula Deserta, and the one north of Europe is that of the Hyperboreans, and the one north of America is labelled Aronfi. He labels the waters within the four islands as the Mare Suginum, and speaks of a violent whirlpool that sucks the incoming waters down into the earth. In addition, his map shows a ring of small, very mountainous islands around the four islands, which numerous islands, Rushek says, are uninhabited. So you can see we start to form a mystic cosmology that existed up into the 17th century. There's the land of the Hyperboreans. There's a ring of uninhabited mountainous islands and a treacherous whirlpool and an absolutely violent sea surround this area. So it's kind of an otherworld, almost kind of land of the dead, where human beings can't possibly exist. And that makes a good kind of liminal step into other worlds. This place where all things within the earth are drawn into and beneath. The magnetic force that points there, all compasses point there. And then there's the tempestuous, terrible waters, that surrounded, protected, and prevented human beings from passing through, or indeed getting back, as in the aforementioned disastrous trip in Croydon's account earlier, where 4,000 persons entered the indrawing sea but never returned. So from this first globe, published in 1492, right up to the 1700s, this configuration of islands around the pole featured in literally scores of maps. So the suggestion that there must be a large mountain of lodestone at the North Pole to account for the Earth's magnetism goes back at least to the 13th century, not long after the invention of the compass. But what was the source of the four islands on the inward flowing rivers, of the mountains and the Pygmies? Mercator cites his authority for the delineation of the northern regions in the itinerarium of the Flemish traveller Jacobus Noiden, which, as we said already, is a lost, that summary no longer exists. Coyden gave his sources the Res Gestae Arturi Britanni, also lost. This is a book written by an English Minorite, a mathematician from Oxford, who had travelled far north in 1360 and recorded what he saw. And this work was called the Inventio Fortunata. So this is the source that Coyden cites. Also, Mercator and his contemporaries believed the author of the Inventio Fortunata, the English Minorite, the friar, to be Nicholas de Linna, Nicholas of King Lynn. Others have argued against this identification. Thus, the source of the mythical polar geography is a lost work by an unknown author in the 14th century. Nonetheless, it is possible to speculate about where the author of the Inventio Fortunata may have derived this geography. Nansen has found mentions of a great northern whirlpool in Norse legends of the world's well, the Hurfgelmir, which caused the tides by pushing and pulling water through its subterranean channels. The Topographica Hypernica by Geraldus Cambrenus in 1146 to 1220, his description of the northern whirlpool is cited by Mercator, and the Historia Norvega 1180 and the Speculum Regale 1250 of Einar Gunnarsson, and particularly interesting quote from the Langobard author Paulus Warnfridi 720 to 790, also called Diaconus. And this is the quote: "And not far from the shore which we before spoke of, on the west, where the ocean extends without bounds, is that very deep abyss of waters which we commonly call the ocean's navel. It is said twice a day to suck the waves into itself and to spew them out again, as is proved to happen along all these coasts, where the waves rush in and go back in again with fearful rapidity. By the whirlpool of which we have spoken, it is asserted that ships are often drawn in with such rapidity that they seem to resemble a flight of arrows through the air, and sometimes they are lost in the gulf with a frightful destruction. Often, just as they are about to go under, they are brought back again by a sudden shock of the waves, and they are sent out again hence with the same rapidity with which they were drawn in." The persistence of the Inventio Fortunata geography on maps, say for 150 years, is to some extent a testament to the esteem in which Mercator and Ortelius were held by other cartographers. The Inventio Fortunata places a mountain at the pole, and of course many sacred centres are mountains. A passage into the depths of the earth is another common feature of sacred centres. Moreover, the powerful flow of water from the four corners of the earth in through the rivers to the pole, and there down a whirlpool, is the strongest possible confirmation and emphasis of the pole's centrality, as strong almost as the thought of 1,000,000 Muslims facing Mecca from all corners of the earth 5 times a day in prayer. This role the North Pole plays in circulation of the Earth's waters gives the spot the global importance we expect of a sacred centre. Also, a number of sacred centres seem to be connected with primal waters. The Garden of Eden again, the rock of the Temple of Jerusalem, which closes the mouth of the Thahom, the watery chaos beneath the earth that was involved in Noah's flood, Uisneach Hill in Ireland, the seat of the Stone of Divisions, and the centre of Ireland according to the division of the country made by the god Fitnan, son of Ocean, who was also the source of the waters of the deluge, and the mountain Harati, or Alborz, to the east of Iran, which is the navel of waters, as the fountain of all water springs here. Thus, the surprisingly long survival of the Inventio Fortunata geography reflects the mythological power of that geography. It asserted a polar configuration consistent with people's expectation for one of the two spots on the planet pierced by the celestial axis. The other example of northern polar mythology I would like to examine is the Brahmic, Hindu, and Buddhist conception of the Earth. Brahmic, Hindu, and Buddhist mythology is very complex, partly because of the creativity of Indian mythographers, which results in many different versions of each myth, partly because Indian mythographers rarely abandon old ideas and theories and just continue to present them as alongside new ideas, even when the new and old were inconsistent. The complexity may increase even further when one cosmological scheme, for instance, is presented not merely alongside another, but encapsulated within another. In Brahmic, Hindu, and Buddhist belief, the Earth's sacred center is, quite unusually, not near at hand but far off to the north on a separate, unattainable continent. The center of it is Mount Meru, or Sumeru, or Sinuru, and it is the axis mundi, the fixed point about which the heavens revolve. Its summit is the dwelling place of the Trimasa gods, the highest of the six Buddhist world of gods. According to the four-continent Earth model, the Earth's continents are arranged in the form of a lotus flower. Mount Meru stands at the center of the world, the periscarp, or the seed vessel of the flower, as it were, surrounded by circular ranges of mountains. Around Mount Meru, the petals of the lotus are arranged in four island continents, aligned to the 4 points of the compasses. Sounds pretty familiar. Uttarakuru to the north, Ketumala and Aparagoyana to the west, Bhadrasa and Puvidya to the east, and Bharata and Jambuita to the south. Jambuita is part of the world inhabited by humans. The dimensions for all these elements are fantastic. Mount Meru is 84,000 yohanas, or 420,000 miles high. The island continent of Jambudvipa, which includes India, is 10,000 yohanas, 50,000 miles in extent, with an area occupied by the Himalayan range and human habitations being 3,000 yohanas, 15,000 miles in extent. The level of detail and descriptions of all these mythical regions is astonishing. There are named mountain ranges, rivers, races of semi-divine beings everywhere, and we learn the height of each of the race, how long they lived, the shape of their faces. In addition, it was held that on or near Mount Meru was Lake Anotata, or Anotwat, which was the source of the world's rivers. The lake is surrounded by a mountainous rim, and through rocky openings in this rim, shaped like the heads of an ox, horse, lion, and elephant, 4 rivers flow south, east, north, and west respectively. These rivers flow 3 times around Anotata in spirals and then continue in their original direction towards the 4 cardinal points. The river flowing to the south from the ox's head is the Proto-Ganges. After dashing against a mountain spurting high, 60 yohanas or 300 miles into the air, falling back to the earth and following an underground course, it emerges to form 5 rivers whose names can be traced to the rivers in northern India, namely the Ganges and its tributaries. Mount Meru is at the point about which the heavens revolve, the axis mundi, and thus something very similar to the North Pole of the Buddhist and Hindu universe. Indeed, the North Star was held to stand directly above Mount Meru, linked by ropes of wind to all the heavenly bodies. The spot beneath the North Star should, according to our conceptions, be the North Pole, but the cosmographical texts in this tradition hold that the Earth is a flat disk or shallow bowl, and thus the concept of the North Pole is absent. The continent Uttarakuru was held to be north of Mount Meru, and indeed the particle Uttara means north. However, there is a very long tradition of Indian cosmological globes. Such globes, or Bhugolas, were known to the Indian astronomer Aryabhata and are frequently described in medieval Indian texts. Transferring the terrestrial features of Hindu cosmology from a flat disk to a sphere required a number of changes, the most important of which was Mount Meru was moved to the North Pole. The similarities between Inventio Inventio Fortunata and the Brahmic, Hindu and Buddhist concepts of the northern polar regions of the Earth should by now be obvious. Both place a large mountain at the pole, surrounded by 4 islands, aligned as if to the 4 points of the compass. From one mountain radiates the Earth's magnetic field, the other is the pivot of the universe, the home of the divine, and while the Inventio Fortunata has the waters of the world's oceans flowing in towards the pole from the 4 quarters and down into the earth, the Buddhist conception has a large lake with 4 huge rivers flowing out to the 4 corners of the earth. Of course, there are many differences between the 2 conceptions. The one is secular or geographical mythology, the other divine, and there are differences of scale, differences in degree of elaboration, the difference between the water flowing in and the water flowing out, and others. But the similarities are impressive. To attempt to argue that the Inventio Fortunata was by some circuitous means derived from a Buddhist conceptions of the northern polar regions would be at best a highly precarious undertaking. Quite aside from the inherent improbability of such an influence, when the work itself is lost and its author is uncertain, no such argument can have a foot to stand on. I am inclined rather to see the fact that 2 or so similar mythographies of the northern polar regions should arise and persist in 2 so different cultures as a testament to the creativity of these 2 cultures, and to the degree to which these mythologies match our innate transcultural conception of what a sacred center should be. So that's the end of that article, with my apologies for my impromptu commentary midway. So again, the author is Chet Van Duzer, and he's got some very interesting books that are worth checking out on Amazon. I suppose the final commentary from me, I find it really interesting that there's the cosmology lacking from Mr. Duzer's essay is Mount Quef, which is also based in the North Pole, as I mentioned at the start of this video. I find that really intriguing. So you've ended up with Brahmic, Hindu, Buddhist, the Christian world's view of the North, and then you have an Islamic myth as well. And I do think there's some interconnectivity there, that perhaps the root of these ideas have a common source, but that's utter conjecture. The relationship to the 4 cardinal points, the relationship to water, the idea that there is this enormous mountain there, and the idea that this is a place of liminality, that it is a crossroads between our world and another, either the interior or of the world or the divine, makes it a very special place, be that one solely existing in myth. It's a really interesting concept to look at. And there still is some mythology. There still is some mythology around the North Pole. We still have our own modern myths. You know, obviously the obvious one is, of course, that it is the home of Santa Claus. Our Yuletide king, a mythical being that lives in the north and that is capable of traversing the world in one night. That's a big myth, but beyond that, there's also kind of the modern, more conspiratorial myths where there's an international agreement that does not allow for flights across or over the North Pole, that there is no aerial photography of the North Pole, there's no satellite photography of the North Pole. And this kind of supports the whole idea that there is an entrance to an inner Earth there. I'm not saying there is or not, as I obviously never commit to anything, but I do like the idea of it. It is an intriguing thing, and certainly whenever I see anything about the inner Earth, I want to read more. I want to find out more. Is there an entrance to Agartha? So that's it. I think that's all I have for this video. It's just a really interesting juxtaposition through lost books, unknown authors, and then this weird configuration of Buddhist, Islamic, Hindu cosmologies mapped across this Christian mythogeography. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you enjoyed the video, by all means do subscribe for more. Leave a comment below if you've got anything else to add, and talk soon.